This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Malick Hour, a celebration of the life and work of American filmmaker Terrence Malick. Okay, so today I'm joined by Bilge Ebiri, who is a writer for many different places. He's currently he's now the main writer at Vulture. Is that right, Bilge, or am I completely fucking that up?
No. I am. I am a film critic at Vulture and New York Magazine, which is the same outlet. But yeah, I'm not the only critic there. There are several of us. But yeah, I am one of the film critics there, and it is a staff job. So that's primarily where I write these days. So
the reason I'm confused, the reason for my confusion is because I've read your work in different outlets over the years. So that's the motivation. It's because you're so widespread and so good.
Well, it's funny because for many years I wrote primarily for Vulture, but I wasn't on staff there. They didn't bring me on staff until 2019. So for many years I was freelance there, and then actually for about 2.5 years before that I was staff at the Village Voice. So I wrote primarily for the Village Voice at the time, and then the Village Voice shut down, and then Vulture invited me back. But for a long time I was writing a lot for Vulture, but because I was freelance, I was able to write for other places like Rolling Stone, New York Times, all these other places. So it was an interesting period. I mean, it was. And I also had my own blog for a while, which is actually where I wrote a lot of the stuff I wrote about Terrence Malick films. Because for the longest time, I was not a chief film critic or not a first string film critic. I often did not get the chance to review Terrence Malick's films. I mean, when I was at Vulture before I went on staff, our chief film critic was David Edelstein, who was a very good critic and a friend of mine, but he absolutely hated Malick's films. So he would just trash these movies as they came out. And so I always felt like, oh, I got to do something, so I would write something on my own blog, or sometimes with Vulture, I would write a separate piece about the making of the film. But I was often, I was usually not the guy who got to write the review. And so in a weird way, it forced me to write more about the films.
And today we're gonna be looking at a film which I think is probably the moment for a lot of people where the conversation around Malick kind of changed tone. Prior to Malick, it wasn't that he was like prior to this film, it wasn't like he was universally loved. There were plenty of naysayers out there right from the very beginning. Pauline Kael didn't like Badlands or Days, but he had definitely gained a status as a major American filmmaker right up until Tree of Life. And To the Wonder was the first time I think that it almost became like the majority opinion was, oh, this is a misstep, or this is a continuation but in a lesser key.
Well, I remember the early word on To the Wonder coming out. Well, I mean, the thing I remember though is, except maybe for Tree of Life, within my lifetime of actually like watching films and things like that, I'm not counting Days of Heaven and Badlands because that was before I was aware of what cinema was. But with Thin Red Line and The New World, I mean, there were vicious critical battles waged over these films. I mean, when Thin Red Line came out, and obviously hugely anticipated because he'd been away for so long, there was some very nice reviews, but there were also a lot of very negative reviews. And I mean, you chart some of this stuff in the book. It especially because Saving Private Ryan had come out earlier that year, and it was such a kind of, I have my issues with Saving Private Ryan, but it was such a kind of pyrotechnically masterful, now we can say old school Hollywood. Obviously, that at that time we didn't think of it as old school at all. achievement that Thin Red Line, I mean, given everything we know about the Thin Red Line, just seems so strange and quaint and bizarre. And of course, a lot of us at the time loved it. And the thing we all said was, well, here's a guy who, like, for him, the 80s and the early 90s just didn't exist. That period when adventurous, interesting, personal American filmmaking that seemed to die at the end of the 70s. It's like he just completely leapfrogged that period of everyone just making the same, boilerplate stuff. And it's just like, Thin Red Line comes out and it's and it feels like you're back in another era almost. In fact, I remember Roger Ebert said at some point, I think it was Roger Ebert, said it's like, his problem with the Thin Red Line was, I mean, I think he gave it a 3-star review or something. He said it's felt too much like Days of Heaven. Like Days of Heaven Goes to War. I think he said something like that. All I could think was, why is that a bad thing? That's like the greatest movie ever made. What are you talking about?
It's the greatest movie ever made, but war, but with war. That's okay.
Yeah.
I'll take that.
Yeah, and then, but then, like, people were kind of shocked when it actually got those Oscar nominations, and then obviously it didn't win any. But then, the New World comes out. And I remember people really hated the New World. I mean, I remember being in an audience seeing the New World. I mean, I'd seen it already. I'd seen the 150-minute version when they first screened it, and then I went back to see the 135-minute version, and there were people in the lobby outside the theater, complete strangers, bonding over the fact of how much they hated the film. And I remember I would go to parties and random people, without knowing anything about like me or my taste, would come up to me, "Have you seen this piece of shit called The New World?" And just would like rant at me about The New World. I'm like, I love this movie. I'm sorry. So, but then like when Tree of Life came out, there was kind of almost universal praise. Even some of the people that had dismissed Malick before really came to love it. Obviously, it won Cannes. It was nominated for Best Picture, and it seemed like, the ground was shifting. And in retrospect, those earlier films gained a lot more acclaim, retrospective acclaim. I remember, I guess it would have been at the end of the decade, I guess, yeah, maybe, at some point, Christopher Nolan, I remember, issued his like decade best list for the 90s or something like that, and Thin Red Line was on it. I remember, it's just been a lot. There was a lot of people kind of went back, and it seemed like Thin Red Line was now becoming accepted as a masterpiece, and The New World was now also becoming, more warmly received than it had been initially. And then To the Wonder comes out. And I remember the initial festival reports. I didn't see it out of the festivals. I remember these vicious festival reports coming out, reviews, just talking about, what a disaster it was, how laughable it was, what a mistake it was, all this stuff. And I thought, oh my God, he's finally stepped in it. And then I only saw it belatedly. It hadn't opened yet, but they had a couple of critic screenings here in New York, or not here. I'm not in New York anymore. But and I went in expecting something terrible, and I watched it, and I thought to myself, this is magnificent. I have no idea what anyone's talking about. This is absolutely lovely. And then I went and saw it again. Saw it a couple of times before it was released, and if I remember correctly, it was released both theatrically and on demand, which at that time was a sure sign that a film was seen as just, completely unsellable, was just, send it straight to digital. And I was really, really shocked at how much I loved it. And it was, it was a much smaller distributor. The previous films had obviously been studio films, and To the Wonder was just a much more smaller enterprise, which is also why I was able to write so much about it, because, it's a smaller publicist who, loved the idea of getting some pieces out of the film.
Yeah, I remember. See, I saw it in Venice when it premiered, and
Yeah.
I remember going in to see it, and I'd loved Tree of Life, and I obviously had a very close relationship with Malick's films from ever since I started taking cinema seriously, I guess. And at the point, I was sitting next to somebody, and they, you know, that pre-festival thing, the journalists are all sort of gabbing and whatnot, and they began to say, "Oh, whispery voiceovers, this, that, and that." And I got up and said, "I'll see you after the screening," and I moved to another seat. I just thought, okay, if this is it, I can't be sitting next to people who are not going to be into this. Because so even like before a frame had been shown, there was this what you're talking about, this sort of predisposition to not go with it, to not allow it to take them.
Yeah, well, another thing I remember very vividly is, so I saw the film the first time and I loved it, and I found it, very moving. But obviously, I recognized that it was a different style of film, certainly a different style of film than Tree of Life, but all just a different style of filmmaking, or a different formal approach than anything he'd done, than any movie. And I was trying to get to what it was about the film that seemed so, I don't want to say so unique, because, well, also you can't say so unique. That seemed unique. But so I went back and saw it again. And as I was watching it this time, I realized something that I eventually wrote a piece about on my blog that circulated quite a bit at the time, although, nobody remembers it now. But I was quite proud of this piece. But I realized it's a dance film. Like, it really is a dance film. I mean, it's not just, not just a dance film in kind of this, like, woozy, cutesy kind of way, but, like, even ballet slippers make an appearance in the film as a motif. It really is a dance film. I mean, and it's shot like a dance film. He removes dialogue and he removes kind of story action. Instead, defines character relationships and what's happening through the way the characters move around each other, right? You have scenes where somebody, bows in front of somebody. You have shots in which people separate. Those are more important than anything they might say. There was a little bit of that in the other films. Obviously, there's certainly some of that in Tree of Life, but this was the first time. And Tree of Life, he was going after kind of this almost symphonic form. And there, the music is interacting so much with the characters. And also each section of the film kind of corresponds to, symphonic structure. And this was something, I mean, you talk to these people too. This was something Billy Weber told me about, when they were first working on Q, was that, like, Malick had become obsessed with symphonic form, and you really went to town with it on Tree of Life. And so I had that idea in my mind, but then I thought, well, to the wonder, it's not really symphonic, but it is dance. The key is definitely trying to kind of carry us along in this film through just movement. And when I talked to Olga Kurylenko, she said, the only real direction we ever got was to just keep moving. And she said, even if I ever stopped, Terry would poke me to like keep me moving. And that made so much sense to me, in that all the footage he was collecting was really about movement, that he would then go into the editing room, with his now small army of editors and just kind of create relationships and sort of narrative through lines or emotional through lines just through movement. And that immediately opened up the film to me. And then also immediately sort of lays waste to all these silly, comments you hear about a film like this. Oh, so many pirouettes. Well, it's a dance movie, so of course there are pirouettes. Oh, everybody's twirling. Well, it's a dance movie, so they're twirling. Like, get on its wavelength, and it's powerful.
I think that's really true as well, in terms of how much Ben Affleck kind of didn't understand what he was doing in the movie. And I think that's a really interesting piece of direction on the part of Malick's, not to tell him what he was doing in the movie, because he's kind of lost. And that's the point. He's being danced around. And there's a scene, I rewatched it last night in preparation for the podcast, and there's a scene where he sort of, he's, as his job, he's this environmental sort of scientist who's going out to it's very unclear what he's doing, but you get the idea that he's inspecting sort of chemical pollution and man-made disaster. And there's this one scene where scene maybe is too big a word, but where he's trudging in this sludge, and then he's falling in the sludge, and then by the end of it, and it's like something out of Stalker, that he's just in this polluted landscape, and then he ends up climbing up this gravel pit in order to escape it, and it's like a nightmare moment. It's not. Mm-hmm. It's not supposed to be, oh, this is what he did on Wednesday. This was the job he had to do on Wednesday. This is his reality, that he can't see beyond the stuff around him. And he can't react to the women in his life because he's got no grace.
Yeah, and that's so important. And that's the thing. I mean, there's all this movement, but then there's also the way he moves, which is he kind of lumbers through scenes, and that's movement too. Like, that's also part of the dance. It's not, dancing isn't just twirling. Dancing is also, these kinds of, contradictory movements as well, contrast of movements, because otherwise, dance has drama as well. Dance isn't just, hopping around. And I think, and the other thing I thought to myself was, well, and I think I said this in my piece at the time. I said, well, I mean, if Malick wants to do a dance movie so much, then why doesn't he just do a dance movie? Why doesn't he just do a Nutcracker or whatever? But obviously it's not about, like, it's a dance movie, but it's not about the dance. It's about the dance reveals of ordinary humans. And it's like it's a different way of seeing the world, and that's why he does it that way. Dance, an obvious dance movie, Swan Lake the motion picture or something like that wouldn't do that. So I think that he's trying for something really interesting there, and I do think that's an approach that he carries to the other films, although To the Wonder, I think, is much more about that. I mean, it becomes an element obviously it becomes an element in Knight of Cups, and certainly Song to Song, very much so, I think, in A Hidden Life as well. But To the Wonder, I think, is where that formal approach really finds its sort of purest expression. But yeah, no, I rewatched it again just the other day, and I was just like, this is just so marvelous. I don't know. I do think its reputation is improved, though. I mean, in part because, this keeps happening with him, right? He makes a movie, people are like, oh God, oh my God, what's he doing? This is crap. And then they'll name the previous movie that's like, it's nothing like that one. That one was good. It's like when people are like, oh, it's not, it's nothing like The New World. I'm like, well, you fucking people hated The New World too when it came out,
Absolutely.
Like, just give it time. Give it time.
Well, I think there is. I'm waiting for the article. Maybe we'll write it. Maybe you'll write it. You'll be the most qualified to write it, which will be, the Weightless trilogy the best thing? Is this Malick's masterpiece? Are these three films together, actually the apotheosis of what he did rather than another?
Yeah, it's certainly a trilogy. What we really need is for someone to, release the trilogy as some sort of set so that we can officially deem it a trilogy. But and I think you make the point in your book, I think, right? That really the trilogy is Tree of Life, To the Wonder, and Knight of Cups. But then Song to Song becomes part of it as well. So it really is kind of more of a tetralogy. But it is interesting how, and this was, this was the other thing with To the Wonder that really struck me at the time. And it struck a number of people, if I remember correctly, also, including, our pal Matt Zoller-Seitz, which was, how remarkable is it that this person who for years was such a mystery and obviously cultivated this mystery around himself to some extent, he makes Tree of Life, which is, Tree of Life, as there was the Cube project, and they had the sort of the creation of the cosmos, the history of the cosmos, and the history of humanity and life on Earth, and all that that was the initial idea. And he kept trying to find a story to ground it. And ironically enough, ultimately, after all those years, the story he finds is the story of his own life, his own family's life. And with that, the floodgates are weirdly open, and suddenly he's making these films obviously the average person isn't going to realize that To the Wonder is autobiographical, but to those of us who had followed his career and had read, various articles about it, it's just like, oh my God, he made a movie about his marriage, and it's, like as I was watching the film again the other day, I noticed a couple of these like weird little, these weird little S&M moments, when Rachel McAdams, has her hands tied and all that stuff, and then there are those little elements in Song to Song too, right? And so as I'm watching that, there's a little bit of it in Knight of Cups as well, but as I'm watching that, I'm like, God, I wonder if that's something. And then I'm like, how crazy is it that I'm thinking about this with the Terrence Malick film, of all, like the guy who just doesn't let on anything. And suddenly it's like, what's the bondage thing, Terry? Just, Matt Seitz used the expression naked to describe this movie, To the Wonder. And it really does feel that way. It just feels so raw, despite the fact that there's so much. The film is such a rarefied thing. It's not, there isn't a lot of narrative, specificity to it. And yet you can sense how raw and tender and painful this whole thing is. Even just the way the voiceovers work, where people are talking in the present tense and then suddenly they'll start talking in the past tense and you realize, oh, something happened to these people, and just the way he lets those things in. It's almost like somebody, it's like a therapy session, it's like somebody's kind of keeping things guarded, and then suddenly there's a slip, or there's a little quiet confession they make, and it completely opens up a whole new world of meaning. I think he's doing this very consciously.
Oh yeah, utterly. And there's I think it goes with this idea that Malick has this sort of public persona, weirdly, because obviously it's a silhouette. It hasn't got any details.
Sure.
It's not. You can only see the outline of the absence, really. And yet, when you look in the films, as you say, that it's really. It's almost as though we get blinkered from being able to see things which are right there in front of us. So, like, this is an erotic film. This has eroticism in it, and it's highly charged eroticism. And it's not like tasteful, if you like. It's not just. There is an element of dance to it, but there's also an element of these guys are just fucking. They have lust. They have a genuine desire, and as you say, bondage or some other kinks might be there as well. There's a real sense that am I really in love with this woman, or is it just because she looks like Olga Kurylenko and she's crazy and I can't get
she's the most beautiful woman in the world.
Yeah, precisely. And and maybe she's absolutely terrible for me and I'm terrible for her, but that's kind of the joke of the film, is he meets his soulmate halfway through the film and realizes this is my absolute soulmate. This is the person I should be with. But the minute that happens, Marina, is it Marina? I see how the lack of specificity. Marina sort of voiceovers in and says, I've met a man and he'll marry me for a green card. And the next thing you see is them getting married beside a bunch of prisoners, just in case there was any doubt to how he views marriage at this
prisoners
stage.
the prisoners are their witnesses. It's so great because it's
so funny.
It's funny, it's throwaway, it speaks to just how hasty this is, but it's also like, what an incredible symbol for a doomed marriage. Our witnesses were prisoners, But no, it's he's actually a very funny filmmaker if you allow. If you break through this idea that his work is self-important, which is so clear isn't. A person who is self-important wouldn't make movies like this. That's the thing. It's not like, that's the thing. I think people mistake the voiceovers because they think, oh, this is him trying to tell us what to feel and what to think and how he wants us to think about things. And it's like, no, it's actually the exact opposite. It's literally the exact opposite. If Terrence Malick wanted you to think a certain thing, there's an easy way for him to do it. But this is so clearly him basically saying he doesn't really know what any of this stuff is. He's just sort of throwing it out there and letting you kind of find your way in it. And I think that I think that's just like extraordinary artistry. It requires extraordinary artistry to make it work, but also it's just like so humble in a way, you know? Yeah, no, I think the as we call it, the Weightless trilogy, which I credit you with putting that. I mean, I know that was one of the titles of the song, but it does feel like that trilogy is, or tetralogy, or whatever we wind up calling it, is it's going to feel like a monumental achievement at some point.
Mm.
Possibly years after Malick has passed away. But it's such a distinctive series of films that nobody's able to pull off. Like there are films that are influenced by them that are quite good, but then there are films that try to imitate that style of filmmaking and they don't work at all.
I think this film is dated very, very well. It's remarkable how watching this film now, it feels so far ahead of its time, and yet other films that, as you say, are trying to recount a relationship in this sort of glimpsed, interrupted moment and intimacy and the rawness of it just don't. Either they resort to being radio plays or they just don't manage it in the end.
There's a lot of bad Sundance movies came out of this stuff, but thankfully Terry's films were not one of them.
I mean, one thing that I noted, I'm writing the chapter, it's a point I make as well, of just how many languages there are in this film. You've got, obviously, Olga is speaking French, even though she's Ukrainian. You've got Spanish with Javier Bardem playing the priest. And that
the Italian lady that shows up halfway through.
Yeah, the Italian who turns up, who I must admit, she's the part of the movie I like the least.
Well, that's she's, I just love it because it's such a kind of wrench in the, like, suddenly, who's she? What's happening?
She's like the flying circus in Days of Heaven. She just sort of arrives.
But this is exactly what I wanted to say. The other thing about To the Wonder that I don't know if I thought about this at the time. I saw it a bunch of times when it came out and around then, but watching it again now, I thought to myself, this is really kind of going back to Days of Heaven. I mean, this is kind of almost a reverse of what happens in Days of Heaven, and it's almost like, and there are even shots in the film that I think to myself, oh, this is actually like a shot from Days of Heaven that he's just redoing with, instead of a scarecrow, it's Olga Kurylenko or whatever, and there's so many little moments like that I thought to myself, there's something here. There's something going on here, and there is something, and the fact that Affleck's character is, I know the narrative stuff isn't that important, but the fact that Affleck's character is kind of going through and assessing all this environmental damage and the way that the earth has been poisoned, it does feel like an almost updating of, this is what, here's what Days of Heaven was, and now here's what's happened to this world. And the Italian lady, this time I realized, oh wait, this is like the circus. This really is like literally like the Italian circus has come to town again.
Throw your bag here. We'll get it later. What's the matter with you? Yeah. That's not liberating. I've got my phone in there. There's also that the thing about Javier Bardem's character and the priest. I think many people saw that as, here he is suddenly turning up in his movie and giving this religious stuff. Don't come at us with your religion, sort of. There was a real reaction against that. But I mean, my point with that is, so what if you religion is an interesting thing to talk about, why not talk about it? And B, religion in itself is an interesting aspect of life, and B, the priest is a priest who has lost his faith, and that gives you an opportunity to look at how is losing your faith but how is losing your belief in another person different from losing your belief in God, or how is it the same, or how or just the capacity to believe is more. I mean, there's a bit that Marina says in voiceover which really struck me this time, which was, when you're up it's really great, and why can't we always be? I'm paraphrasing because she was speaking in French, but when you're up, it's amazing. And but is that real? And which one is real? Is it the dream to be up and the reality to be down, or is it the other way around? And I was thinking, you could be talking about religious ecstasy, you could be talking about love, or you could be talking about mental illness. All of those things are in the film, and all of those things feel to be equally, well, not equally necessarily, but to be pertinent.
For me, the religion stuff in Malick's films, and I recognize it's different in each film, is among the most interesting is among the most interesting things. And I say this as a total atheist. I've never been a religious person. I was raised by atheists, and I've always been one. But I always love. I mean, I'm a sucker for religious movies, and I love, Jesus movies and things like that, because I find that in film is where I can believe these things. Film is, I mean, there's something transcendent about just, you know, cinematic form to me. And it's a great venue to sort of have it out with these ideas. And the way Malick expresses doubt is I think, really, really lovely. And he's, as you say, I mean, this is a priest that's lost his faith. And we see figures like this throughout in his films. They don't have to be priests, but they're people who are wrestling with the idea of faith, very often because they're in these, incredibly agonizing circumstances, be it emotional or physical. And that is, I mean, in so many ways, that's also the atheist's argument, right? Like, how can there be a God in a world like, how can somebody or some entity have created a world full of so much pain and misery and random awfulness? But the fact that, I think Malick is very clear-eyed about this stuff. He's not mystical about this stuff. He recognizes the chaos more than almost anybody, including, filmmakers who aren't religious. And he goes head on into it. In fact, his films, I mean, even his filmmaking style is, kind of replicates the chaos of modern life in so many ways. And I find that quite beautiful. Now, I only belatedly, I mean, obviously you write about this in the book, and I'd heard about it a few years ago, but I didn't know this at the time, because I mean, I did write that piece on To the Wonder, or the making of To the Wonder, but I didn't know this, if I remember correctly, the stuff with Javier Bardem. So much of it, like, it wasn't actually like Malick shooting it; they just kind of went off, and I know that filmmaker later took that footage and turned it into a 45-minute film, which I still have not seen. Remarkably, I keep meaning to watch it, and I really should, but I do find it interesting that Malick allowed someone else to sort of do all that, which speaks to the generosity of his approach, and also to this idea that he's not some, philosopher king who has all these ideas that he wants to hammer into our heads. And in fact, it's, his approach to filmmaking is very collaborative and generous and open-minded and open-ended. But I mean, I love the Javier Bardem scenes, and I love the idea that at first we're like, who is this guy? Like, what's going on? Why? And he's just seeing all these people who clearly are just, in bad shape, and really need some sort of guidance. And then, of course, eventually he makes his way to Ben Affleck, and it's like, oh, yeah, okay, yeah. These people need some serious guidance too. I mean, they look like Olga Kurylenko and Ben Affleck, but I mean, and Rachel McAdams, but there's clearly just these people are broken in so many ways.
I love the way when you first see Javier Bardem as well, he's got these little glasses on, and he does look like a kind of normal sort of priest, as normal as Javier Bardem can ever look.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. Javier Bardem is such an intriguing looking guy that people have to do things to him to make him look like somebody who could possibly exist in this world.
Exactly.
He's just like
Exactly.
he's like an Easter Island statue come to life, you know?
But I mean, he's perfect in this. He gets this. I remember seeing The Unbearable Lightness of Being with Daniel Day-Lewis and
Mm.
just being caught by a certain shot of Daniel Day-Lewis looking at something and just thinking, God, I wish I was that thoughtful. I wish I looked that good when I was thoughtful. It didn't matter what you're thinking about, just
Yeah,
just that, the image of
yeah.
thoughtfulness. But yeah, no, I think it's weird how he's sort of spun into the story, and yet apparently he isn't a story element, and yet a little bit like Linda Manz in Days of
Mhm.
Heaven, maybe he's the most important character in the whole thing.
Yeah, I mean, he's and that's the other thing. It's like Malick so clearly identifies with him to a certain extent. I mean, I think he identifies
Mm.
with all of these characters, obviously. I mean, it's like within the schema of the autobiography, he is the Ben Affleck character, but he's so clearly also the Olga Kurylenko character,
Yeah.
And he's so also the Rachel McAdams character, and he's also the Javier Bardem character. Like there's this kind of, I mean, we saw this in Thin Red Line as well, but this sort of this multi-pronged consciousness. But he finds ways to enter these worlds and these people's minds and their hearts, that I think is quite beautiful, and it's so evident as you watch the film that he so clearly identifies with all these people.
What do you think of the idea that, because it really strikes me that this is Malick being, because he's made movies which are about uniquely the American
Mhm.
experience, Badlands, the invention of the teenager,
Yeah,
the Thin Red Line in the Second World War, and the New World, the creation of America.
yeah,
All of his films have this, and then with To the Wonder for the first time, it feels like he steps outside of America and has a non-American voice come back to America and see America in a different way. And I found again watching it the other night, the when you switch back to Paris after you've been in America, it's suddenly there's such a different vibe to it, a
Mhm.
different feel to it. The voiceover is different,
Yeah.
even though it's the same person talking. I don't know. There's so much in this which isn't straightforwardly, oh, look at the ugly Americans, or look at the big supermarkets, or look at this, or look at that. It's much more complicated than that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, it's so funny. This last time I was watching it, yeah, I mean, I knew that she goes back to France, and I think she even says it. But at that, when we cut back to France, I was like, "Is this Toronto?" Like, I was like, "Look, this just does not look like France at all, or Paris." But the thing that I was, and no knock to Toronto, which is a lovely city, but there was something weirdly kind of impersonal about it.
Yeah, I know it's the exact area is like
Yeah,
North Paris, and it's this sort of it's got that very big sculpture that's very
yeah,
modernist, and I
yeah.
think it might be the other end of the sort of facing Eiffel
Yeah,
Tower.
it's almost like something I was gonna say Clockwork Orange, but also, I mean, it's kind of what Godard did with Paris, right? With Alphaville, where he
Exactly.
he found all he found all the modernist angles to make it seem like a city of the future. But what was I gonna say? Oh, no, this idea of a foreign voice coming into this, that's actually one of the things that really struck me about the film when I first saw it, because I came to the United States in 1980. I was 7 years old. I came with my mom, and my dad followed us about a year later. But I came first with my mom, and we moved to the this like small area in Northern Virginia, and first in DC and then Northern Virginia. And we came from Turkey. And
Mm.
this was, I mean, like I said, it was 1980. We just purely by coincidence, we happened to leave Turkey 2 days after a coup d'etat.
Mm.
And then, but in the 70s, Turkey, especially Ankara, was in pretty rough shape. Of course, I wasn't really aware of all this stuff. I only learned about it later because I was a child. But I remember coming to the U.S. and being so absolutely floored by the hugeness of everything, and also just the plenitude of everything, and also like
Mm.
that was me in the supermarket, like twirling around and just like arms out, amazed at how much space there is between the rows and how much stuff there is and how colorful it all is. Like we didn't have that. And obviously this is I mean, they're coming from France and it's later, but like I think I'm sure that Malick, when he came back to Texas with Marie, right? Marie, his French wife and her daughter, like I'm sure this was something he noticed. That sense,
Sorry,
Michelle,
Michelle.
sorry,
Yes,
sorry,
Michelle.
sorry, yes. And yeah, there was another Marie, right? Though earlier.
There was Jill. Jill Jakes was his first
Okay.
wife, and Michelle Moret
Okay. All right.
was his second wife, which is this is
You're
the
right. Um,
and Rachel McAdams plays essentially
Sister
Alexandra
Eki, right? Yeah.
Eckie Wallace, who
So, but when he came back with Michelle, who was French, um, I think that there's like he must have perceived this, and he must have kind of
mm,
even identified with it to a certain extent, maybe just because he'd been away for so long, and also, he's a perceptive guy, presumably. But the film, I think, captures the sort of the euphoria of just like discovering all the size so well. And in fact, when they first come to the U.S., the way the first shots of this area, the way he reveals them, it's almost like the film's aspect ratio has changed, like it's just so
mm.
expansive. I remember being so moved by that when I first saw the film. I was like, well, this actually is maybe the only film I've ever seen that captures that weird sense memory I have of when I first came to the US. And it's so clear that he identifies with it, like he identifies with like he enters these people's minds in that sense. And I remember some of the criticism were like, "Oh gosh, how many more shots of people in a supermarket or at a Sonic do I have to see from Terrence Malick?" And I was watching it going, this is great. I could watch 3 hours of this. I feel like I'm watching some weird aspect of my own life replayed before my eyes.
I think as well the transition that they're in Paris in this beautiful garden, in this beautiful park with all this history around
Yeah.
them, and when the little girl finds out she's going to America, she's really excited, and they run up to the Statue of Liberty, which is a copy of
Yeah.
it is from the original is there preserved, and then you see them this wonderful cut that he does where it's almost as if they continue running in Paris and they finish running in
Yeah.
America. They haven't got on an airplane or bought tickets or anything. They've just run from one frame into another at much the same speed and doing much the same things. And it's just like, there's, and I love that moment. And I'm sure this is a moment that Malick treasures. In fact, I'm positive because I spoke to the editors and they were that this is the sort of thing he would pick up on, and
Hmm.
is the bit where Tatiana Kalina, who's the actress playing Tatiana, looks at she passes a police officer and she sort of turns to her mother with her eyes wide like, oh, he's got a gun,
Yeah.
look at without saying anything. She's not saying, but that's what she's registered suddenly, like, oh, they've got
Yeah.
guns. And it's just a moment. That's not a scripted moment. That's just something that they
Hmm.
filmed, and I love that. I love that. It's so
And
truthful.
and there's something about, this euphoria that he represents, I think, of coming to America for, Marina and Tatiana. There's also another element there, and I think he must have, felt this as well. But this idea of introducing someone you love to the place where you're from, right? The place where you come from, the place, like, I mean, we've all felt that, right? The idea of like showing a significant other, you know, the
Mhm.
place where you grew up, or the place that was very important to you as a child or something like that. I mean, I've had those moments and sometimes merely fantasized about those moments, but like now we're together. I'm going to take you to, my grandmother's house where I spent so much of my childhood, or I like this, and there, he captures some of that euphoria as well. But then, and then of course, as the film proceeds, this landscape gets poisoned in a way by the wreckage of their relationship, so that it changes. And that's the other thing about Malick that's so wonderful, is the way that he can just change the emotional valence of a scene through just some simple little, a cut or just a gesture or a movement. The thing that I always point to, but there are many examples of this throughout his filmography, is in, the Tree of Life. When early on, when we're seeing the kids play, this is, almost like a prologue in the film. And we're seeing the kids play, and we see the brother who's going to die, and he's still a child. He just walks behind a tree, right? And it's just a throwaway moment. And I don't know that when they were shooting there was anything planned there, but that moment becomes so kind of gently emblematic of the heartbreak to come, right? Or hidden life. When you see the family playing in the field with the little pots, and the pots are like little are tinkling, right? And this is like, as we
Yeah.
know that like war is on its way, and it's just like the angle's a little low, and they look happy, but they're like stooped a little, and just the tinkling of the pots is just so ominous on the screen. So they're doing this like little, I mean, they're presumably having fun, but the sense we get from the way this is shot and cut is just like, oh my God, something horrible is about to happen. He's just so good at that. I mean, it's just he's such a natural filmmaker in that sense. And I mean, To the Wonder is just filled with stuff like that.
Those moments of sort of reality and naturalness sort of play into the dance as well,
Absolutely.
because people, there's a moment where he breaks up with Rachel McAdams and they just roll around in leaves, and it's like she's struggling to get away from him, and it's absolutely exactly what you said. It's like something that if you saw it on a stage, you would completely accept it. It seems like such a moment of high theatre, but also it cuts away immediately to her sort of turning from him dressed differently in a different moment and just being upset by something he said. And so it's like, is this what they're feeling inside? Are they feeling inside that they should be rolling on the ground and tearing their hair out, but in reality they're just like turning away so you won't see my tears? It's there's a bit as well where he's walking through a house, which I'm not sure if it's being built for him or it's in the stages of construction, or whether it's his father who's building it. It's really, you get zero details. But as he's walking through this house, which is in winter under construction, you just get all these glimpses of his relationship with Marina in a sunnier time, in the house they occupied, and there's just this heartbreak of absence that sort of like, do you remember when we used to stand over here? Do you remember when we used to be over there? And now you're in a different hemisphere. It's just, I mean, I think it's just absolutely brilliant when it does that, and how he does that repeatedly over and over again. And each time, and yet at the same time, it's not repetitious.
No, it's not. It's not at all. And when there is repetition, it's not really repetition. Like you're watching something. I mean, it's almost like, the way a motif might develop in a piece of music, right? I mean, you watch something and it's like, oh, they're doing this again. Oh no, wait, they're doing something else. Like it just develops all along. I think it's just an incredibly well put together film. The although I will say, and this isn't a criticism of it, because I can watch To the Wonder for hours and hours and hours. I do wonder how I do wonder how these films would have been received if they were shorter. I mean, To the Wonder is not a long film at all. But I do wonder if it was like Days of Heaven length, if it was like, 94 minutes long. Because I think audiences' tolerance for this kind of sort of more meditative, expressive, impressionistic expressive type of filmmaking that he does, like, I think the shorter these things are, people tend to respond to them better. So not that I personally want the film to be shorter at all. In fact, I would love to see it even longer. But there is a part of me that's like, if this movie was like 95 minutes long, people would be calling it a masterpiece.
Yeah, it's about 10 minutes longer than that.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's small
Yeah.
margins.
Oh, yeah.
It's under 2 hours.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, I think, it could definitely, you get the feeling it could definitely easily lose 10 minutes without being any the
It wouldn't
worse.
be, I mean, I feel like it maybe wouldn't be as powerful for me, but at the same time, I mean, the problem is these films come out and you have to contend with people's responses to them, even though ultimately
Mm.
that's meaningless. I mean, meaningless to you and me, meaningful to the people who give money to people who make movies. Um, but I always wonder, I'm like, if he was making, if these later films were just like these kind of short little things like, 85, 90 minutes long, Badlands, Days of Heaven, like I bet he would have had an easier time of it. But that's, he's not interested in having an easier time of it, so that's okay.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, he got criticized because there was like bits of Tree of Life in here. And I think there was like, oh, why is he why is he using that footage again? But again, those moments for me are exactly where you have like
Yeah.
poetry being added. So, the scene that I mentioned earlier where she's talking about, why can't we, it's essentially saying, why can't we always be at the height of our love, or why can't we always be happy, and being up there and being down here, why can't we have transcendence? The shot that is accompanying that voiceover is of like the depths of the ocean and sea
Yep.
turtles. And so they're talking about like being underwater when you're talking about being in heaven. And it's just, it's just, there's nothing in the movie that points towards any character being involved with sea turtles or what have you. But at the same time, it totally makes sense. You know what I mean? It totally has. It just
It
works.
absolutely does work. And yeah, I mean, that's the other thing I noticed this last time. I must have noticed it at the time as well. But there's one shot that I'm pretty sure is the young lead of Tree of Life, just seen from the back. Because it looks like he's just wearing one of the same things from that film. And it's just we don't see his face at all, but I'm just like, oh, that's the kid.
Hunter McCracken.
Yeah, yeah. I think we see Hunter McCracken from the back because it's just he's got kind of the telltale head, and then I think he's wearing a T-shirt that he wears in Tree of Life, and I was just like, oh, I think this is just like some random cut shot from Tree of Life, but he does that. He's been known to do that. That Terrence Malick. Actually, I was going to ask you about this. I can't remember if I mentioned this to you when last we talked. I remember this story. I must have
Mm.
mentioned this to you, but I remember this story. I never managed to find it, but I remember when I was a kid reading this article. I want to say it was Empire or Premiere magazine, but it might have been some other magazine. It might have been like American Film or something like that. It was an article by somebody. It was, at the height of Malick's, wilderness years, one of those kind of where are they now type pieces. And it was somebody who knew Malick and who had worked with Malick. And I want to say it sounds like it should have been Paul Ryan, but I actually asked Paul Ryan this when I interviewed him, and he said, no, it wasn't me. They hadn't heard from Malick in forever. And then one day they heard from him and he said, come meet me here on this day at this time and, bring a camera with you or bring some camera equipment. And so they met up and it was just in the middle of nowhere. And it was just Malick, he wanted to shoot the transit of Venus. And
Mm.
they pointed a camera up and they shot the transit of Venus. And this person, said, they didn't hear from him again after that. Um, and I remember, and this was even before Tree of Life, but I remember in the New World, there's a shot of the transit of Venus, and I was like, there it is. like he must have kept this footage all that time. It probably shows up in Tree of Life too, or some cut of the Tree of Life, or Voyage of Time or something like that. But I was just like, like just he's collecting stuff all the time, and you never know where it'll be used.
Yeah, well, I mean, the producers, Nicholas Gonda, I interviewed for the book. He would say that he would have these huge
Hmm.
files on each film, and you never quite knew that the files were obviously quite old, and
Hmm.
he'd been keeping materials. And in there, you might have the script or what passed for the script, but you would also just have like a poem and something else, and and photographs, and it would all be, he would be collecting these for years and years and years prior to making the film, so that when he finally came to make the movie, he just had this material, and some of this material was like, where's the nearest car park for this location shoot, and what's a good restaurant that we can send the crew to eat in if that, and so he'd just been meticulously researching stuff, or where whenever he travels somewhere, it's like, okay, this could be a place that we could use. What could we use this for? So it just, and it goes with something Jack Fisk said right at the beginning when he started the first day of shooting on Badlands, when he said, this guy's a painter. He looks at a film set as if he's a painter, and these are just his materials, are just his colors. And what's remarkable, I think, having lived with this project for quite a while, is that those observations that people make at the beginning of his career are all going all the way through to the end of his career and to the later years. Franz Rogowski, who is in Hidden Life, in an interview says, "Oh, I'm just purple," and Terry says, "I want purple," and here I am, and he doesn't want me to be anything else. He just wants me to be purple. And you just sort of think, oh, well, there you go. There it was in Badlands. There it is in Hidden Life. It's
Yeah, and that was an observation I remember a number of people made during Thin Red Line, and in many ways, Thin Red Line feels like the purest expression of that in a way because of all the big actors. Like there you really notice the purple because it's George Clooney.
yeah.
There is the sense that like that's where it really kind of became evident to people how he does this, because the paints, so to speak, were so recognizable that it's like, oh, we need a little Woody Harrelson here, and we need a little John C. Reilly there, and I thought, obviously nobody'd seen anything like that before. And I mean, it's just, these films are so rewatchable too. I mean, it was just an absolute joy to revisit To the Wonder, a film. I mean, I must have seen it 8 or 9 times at the time, and it just doesn't get old. I mean, every time you watch it, something new comes up. Knight of Cups is that way too. Like for all the people that trash that film, I'm just like, I don't know what to say to you. I love watching it. Like what a watchable movie, which is the surest, which is the best way, I think, to a viewer's heart, is just that, even if you don't quite understand it at first. I mean, there's a thing I always like to say: a film you have to see more than once has to be a film you want to see more than once. Because you see a lot of films where people are like, oh, you need to watch it, and I'm like, but I don't want to watch it again. It was tedious and annoying. Whereas these films, it's like I will happily drop everything and just go watch Night of Cups again, or Song to Song, or obviously Badlands, Days of Heaven. Seen those films, dozens of times. But it is really, for a filmmaker who doesn't have a huge body of work, even though he's been, more prolific of late, or not of late, but this period at least that we're talking about now. The idea that, he has this, small body of work, but the body of work is just endlessly rewatchable, and you can just revisit it over and over and over again and discover new stuff in it all the time, in part because of the way he works. In so many ways, that's worth so much more than a filmmaker who like racks up 40, 50 films,
And then you have to pick out the ones that are actually worth watching, right. And the ones that are nearly good. Yeah. I think when time passes, there will be hopefully some sort of consensus on a remarkably high consistency of artistic achievement. One thing I wanted to come to before we sort of close off the episode is I always found there is a sort of elliptic quality to the film. You're not given the story. The story is there. And people I talked to who had edited it, and I said, "Is this what happens?" I sort of had to ask them, "Is this is the story, right? This is what happens?" And they were like, "Yep, you've got it," but that's kind of not what ended up on the screen to the same amount. So there was a whole subplot about who the company representing. Who's actually, there was a conspiracy about the town and the pollution and stuff like that. But the thing that I'm quite happy that's all gone away, by the way. That's not a problem for me. But I do find, and I'm curious to get your take on this, the Marina's death, I think, is the one thing that I'm not sure people on a first watch necessarily get or are necessarily supposed to get. What do you think? Is that something that you got the first time you watched?
It's interesting because I remember we talked a little bit about this last time. I got that, but I got that not from that light at the end, which is very kind of mysterious and beautiful, and ominous. But really just when she wakes up in that kind of muddy, foggy netherworld, it was so clear. I was like, okay, something has happened. And I didn't know, I mean, I knew that Michelle Malick had died. I knew that. So I knew that that was part of the real life story. I didn't know those if it was that this was meant to be really a representation of death or a kind of a death in life, and that she'd kind of been cast off in this world. But it was very sad to see her there, but also there was this like weird kind of joy in the performance still. So it was hard to, like, I love the ambiguity. I did think like, oh, I feel like we're not on planet Earth anymore, kind of feeling.
Yeah, we're no longer in
Yeah,
Kansas
we're not in
or
Kansas anymore,
Oklahoma.
or yeah, we're not in Bartlesville. But I did sense that this was definitely something other. And then of course, obviously that like weird little moment with the light at the end, which is such a, I mean, that is actually a bit of a, not that the film, it's not a cliche in the film, but like the the sudden flash of light at the end indicating that someone has died is, it's like in movies where like the car is coming head on, Silkwood kind of thing.
Right.
But that light is so beautiful and so mysterious that you do wonder, oh, what's that? Like there's something else is happening, and obviously having experienced the Tree of Life not long before this with its final scenes, you know, I did sense that there was an echo there of that as well. But I wouldn't have, if somebody had told me to write down like, if I had to do like the Sight and Sound or formerly Monthly Film Bulletin of like synopsizing the plot before I launched into my review, I would not have said, "Oh, she dies," just because it seems
Mm.
so inexact. But I was very happy that you actually got to the bottom of what is happening there.
It's so, I mean, it's weird because you're looking at that landscape and, you can see there's like an antenna with a light flashing and the horses and there's a dog running past her. And it's sort of like, well, it isn't. But at the same time, it feels like Tarkovsky and
Yep.
it feels like Solaris, it feels like, that little garden that he's got,
Right.
that he is planet Earth for him,
Right. Yeah.
but it's not planet Earth anymore, and it's not, it's just his. What's her concept of heaven? It's untrammeled movement, and it's
Yeah.
being in nature and being part of nature, which means being soaked to the skin by nature as well.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing about this type of transcendental filmmaking. When it really is transcendental, it really is. I mean, how wonderful is it to be able to watch something like this and not know what it means, but not be confused, It's such a delicate, balance to be able to
Mm.
kind of allow us to navigate through this without with questions in our head, obviously, because we're constantly supposed to be thinking about what we're watching and experiencing it in all its kind of multifaceted glory, but without sort of, and that's a problem I often have with films that try to do this stuff, where I'm like, you've lost me. Like I'm no
Mm.
longer experiencing what's on screen as this kind of ambiguous, beautiful thing. I'm just asking questions and I don't know what's going on. That never happens to me with Malick's films, like that never happens to me. He manages to weave everything in such a way that like when it's meant to be ambiguous, I know exactly that it's meant to be ambiguous, which is such an unambiguous thing to say, but it is like I never feel lost in a bad way with his work, which is why I cherish it so much, because there are so many filmmakers who do try for this kind of stuff, and I do feel lost with their work. I do feel like, am I supposed to know what's going on right now? I'm not sure.
Yeah, and I mean, there's something to be said for not making story the most important thing,
Yeah.
and not holding your hand through it. I mean, I use the example as well of when they have the argument about the infidelity that Marina
Mm.
commits, and she sort of commits it very much as a, this relationship's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
He's never going to have the courage to finish it. So I'm going to do something so bad that he'll have to, will have to finish.
Yeah.
But the way that scene plays out without any dialogue, the person who speaks the most is the person trying to take their order, the poor, presidential candidate trying to take the fast food order. So it was about the argument and the infidelity and the sort of Marina sort of finishing the relationship via
Right.
suicide by cop. Interestingly, it's Skinny Pete from Breaking Bad. Who is she?
What's so funny? I was watching that. I was like, God, he looks so much like kind of a young Billy Bob Thornton, like a really young Bob Thornton. Or like the guy Billy Bob Thornton is trying to look like with his like bad hairpiece and everything nowadays.
I tell you what's really interesting as well is he turns up, the carpenter, the Jesus-y carpenter. He turns up with the wind harp, and you've seen her playing the wind harp much earlier on in the film. And so it's like, and I think that's very typical of Malick to just not care about continuity. It's just like he gifts her it, but she's had it she's had it since the beginning of the movie. How did
The fact that he's making these films and he's going even further into sort of that non-narrative land, even though, Hidden Life obviously had, was a little more narrative. But the fact that he is going in this direction at a time when it could be argued films are more narrative than ever, in part because of the complete dominance of streaming, right? I mean, this is the battlefront that I will never stop yelling about, which is, because I talk to a lot of people who say, well, it's not, I mean, yeah, theaters are great, but if theaters die, films will still exist. Cinema will still go on. And all I can think is, no, it won't, because the theatrical space is really where this type of filmmaking that is non-narrative, that is experiential, that type of filmmaking really emerged because of the theatrical experience, right? If we only had TV movies, we would never have gotten these types of films. We would never have gotten Tarkovsky. We would never have gotten, Skolimovsky's Deep End. We would never have gotten Bertolucci's The Conformist. I mean, all these films, or Godard. I mean, on the small screen where the idea of this type of experience gets lost a little bit, and you really start focusing on, dialogue and story and things like that, this type of filmmaking will die out. And the fact that he really still sticks to this and is kind of moving even further in this direction at a time when it's harder and harder for films to be seen theatrically is very brave, I think. I was talking to Laura Dunn, the documentary filmmaker. She did The Unforeseen. Malick is a producer on her films, or executive producer on her documentary.
About Wendell Berry.
Yeah, and she did the other film. Then she did the film about Wendell Berry. She has a new film that hasn't gotten distribution yet, but she came to Yale a couple of months ago and she screened it. And a bunch of us had dinner afterwards. But she was talking about, there was at some point, and Malick is an active executive producer on these films. Like, he does watch cuts and gives notes and things like that. And she was saying with this film, she had such a kind of the film. Some of the film is about like our loss of our loss of attention and our loss of kind of thought and caring because of just like obsession with screens and things like that. And she said, she felt a little torn because she's like, well, I'm making movies, right? And I mean, here I am ranting against screens and kind of the total ubiquity of visual culture and stuff like that. And here I am making films. And she came to Malick with this dilemma. And Malick said, that's different. You're making films for the theatrical experience, and that's not screens. That's not what we talk about when we talk about television and cell phones and mobile devices and just like the ubiquity of screens that are just completely pulling apart our attention and frying our brains. You're making films for the theater where a person goes in and they focus their attention on the theatrical screen, and they have an experience. And it was just so interesting to hear her say that was something that Malick does think about and cares about. And I think it's true of these films, and it's a shame, of course, that so many of these films will wind up being seen only as streaming or on-demand type experiences. But obviously, the important thing is that they exist, and but it was very heartwarming to hear that is something that is on his mind as well, even now.
Oh, absolutely. I think there is I mean, it's in this movie at the very beginning when the Ben Affleck and Olga Kurylenko are on the train and they're playing with a little camera,
Right.
and there's already that sense of that creativity and filming each other and being apart. Also, I mean, a little biographical thing is, despite the fact they seem to move into several different properties during the course of the film, you never see them with a television.
Well, that's the thing. Like he used to have the TV covered up, right?
Yeah, he didn't like it, and that was one of the big arguments that alienated him from the Tatiana character, the child character. She wanted to watch TV. She was a normal kid and a teenager, and she was going into her teens. So
I mean, if I didn't have
TV
when we moved to the US, I don't think I would have been able to learn English. I mean, I learned English watching Scooby-Doo.
Yeah, exactly. Which is one of the reasons for the vocabulary you use in your reviews when you talk about things being rah, rah, rah.
Yeah, exactly. It's really
Scooby snacks and
yeah, I really need to stop saying Sykes.
Oh, thank you so much, Bilge. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you about To the Wonder.
Thank you.